I'm delighted to welcome you all here to day 4 of the summer school. My name is Lucianne Buckley. I'll be chairing this morning's discussions. And today the focus is on international solidarity and human rights monitoring to protect family life. So our focus really here is on international and national monitoring bodies, the role of these organisations and these processes in keeping states accountable in protecting the right to family for persons with disabilities. And we will also then, in the course of the morning, be looking at the role of civil society organisations and advocates and self-advocates in contributing to international solidarity and in helping to build that solidarity. But this morning's first discussion, we're going to be talking about the role of the UN in keeping states accountable. And I'd like to introduce our panel. Okay. So the panel discussion, and it is a discussion, will be facilitated by Victoria Lee, here sitting nearest to me. And Victoria is the Acting Advisor on Human Rights and Disability of the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Formerly, she was Senior Human Rights Advisor of the International Disability Alliance, where she was leading the work before the UN treaty bodies to promote participation of organisations of persons with disabilities and ensuring the mainstreaming of rights of persons with disabilities in alignment with the CRPD. And she's worked with a range of non-governmental organisations engaged in strategic litigation prior to her current role. So that is Victoria. Next to Victoria, we have Silvia Quan from Guatemala. And Silvia is a disability rights activist. In 2003, she joined the Ombudsman's Office as the Disability Rights Defender. And at international level, she's participated in the UN Ad Hoc Committee in charge of drafting the text that was adopted by the General Assembly as the CRPD. And she served as an independent expert to the CRPD committee from 2011 to 2016 and was the vice chair from 2015 to 2016. And at the moment, since 2017, she's been holding the position of Senior Human Rights Advisor at the International Disability Alliance. Okay. So next to Silvia.
That's all right, I'm just Robert's assistant.
Well, almost next to Silvia, we have Robert Martin. So Robert is, of course, an advocate and a lifelong worker for self-advocacy for people with disabilities. He's worked with IHC New Zealand for some years, and he is a long-standing member of the Inclusion International Council and was chairperson of the Self-Advocacy Task Force from 1996 to 2008. He's taken part in negotiations around the CRPD, and he was New Zealand's nominee for the Committee for the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and elected to that role in June 2016. And he's the first person with a learning disability to sit on a UN human rights treaty body. So he's in his third year of that term as an independent expert. And then finally, at my far left, we have Velina Todorova, who's a Bulgarian lawyer and professor. She has published nationally and internationally on disability human rights issues, and has been awarded by the President of Bulgaria for extraordinary contribution to the protection of the rights of the child in Bulgaria. She's a member of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child as well. So we have a varied panel this morning with a very, very wide range of experience and many valuable contributions to make in this area. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Victoria, who will facilitate the discussion of the panel, and then for the last 20 minutes or so, or perhaps even sooner if we get to that, we will have plenty of time then for questions and answers. So thank you very much, Victoria.
Thank you, Lucianne. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be moderating this panel. Last year, we had a similar panel looking at the roles and mandates of several UN human rights mechanisms and how they approach and incorporate intersectionality, and looking particularly at children with disabilities, women and girls with disabilities, and other intersections. So this year, we're exploring how two UN human rights treaty bodies, the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the Committee on the Rights of the Child, how they approach respect for home and family. And these conventions intersect when we speak about children with disabilities, and we have international human rights standards from both of these instruments. So we'll be exploring what these conventions say regarding children with disabilities and their right to family, and how do the committees hold states accountable on how does their work contribute to rights being realized in practice on the ground. So as Lucianne introduced, we have a member of the Committee on the Rights of the Child, Velina, who also was here last year, taking part in this similar type of panel. And we have Robert Martin, a current member of the committee, this assistant Alexia Black, and Silvia Quan, who's a former member of the CRPD committee. But before we turn to our discussion, just as a prelude, I wanted to give some background information to help us better situate our discussion. So just to back up a little bit, the role of treaty bodies. They monitor the application of their respective conventions. So they're made up of each of the CRC and CRPD committee, made up of 18 independent experts. And their activities consist of monitoring implementation of the convention by engaging in country reviews, so engaging in dialogue with states parties to check on the progress of implementation and to provide recommendations on how to advance implementation. They also accept and examine individual communications, so complaints from individuals from those state parties who have accepted that mechanism, in which they look at alleged violations of the convention. And both committees also have the inquiry procedure. So if this is accepted by the state, there's a possibility to send reliable information on grave and systematic violations of the convention, upon which the committees can then decide to open an inquiry to look into that matter and provide recommendations to the state. So there are these different ways in which the committees monitor states and hold them accountable. They also, of course, adopt general comments, which are guidance on specific themes to provide further guidance to states on how to implement specific articles. And we know that the CRC Committee had adopted in 2009 general comment on children with disabilities. And so the Convention on the Rights of the Child, it's actually celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. It was adopted in 1989. And we know that the CRPD committee, CRPD is a bit younger, it's 13 years old. The CRC is the most widely ratified human rights treaty. So it's ratified by all states except for one, so 196 states, and also the most rapidly ratified treaty. The CRPD has 178 states parties, and it's actually the second most rapidly ratified treaty. The conventions, of course, are products of their time. The CRPD is the first human rights instrument of the 21st century. It fully incorporates the human rights-based approach to disability, and it has the advantage of learning the lessons of previous treaty bodies and previous treaties. So it has incorporated specific provisions to help facilitate implementation, which are quite innovative in international human rights law. So for example, we have Article 8 on awareness raising, which does not exist in previous treaties. Article 31 on data collection and disaggregation. Article 33 on establishing national monitoring. And Article 32 on international cooperation. The CRC Committee, the Convention on the Rights of the Child is the first human rights treaty to dedicate a specific provision on persons with disabilities, on children with disabilities specifically, Article 23. And actually, it's the first human rights treaty to make references to international cooperation. It doesn't have a specific provision on it, but it does incorporate it when it talks about children with disabilities, about sharing information and exchanging, fostering cooperation when it comes to the treatment of children with disabilities, and also on education, international cooperation in education. And certainly in its recommendations to states, it's consistently asking about collection of data disaggregated by disability, calling for awareness raising and such. At the same time, the CRC is also a sign of its product of its times. When the committee is looking at Article 23, in its recommendations, it is still put under the category of disability, basic health, and welfare. So it is still that older approach to disability. And some of its language also is a product of its times. And also there is still references to prevention, and General Comment Number 9 does talk about prevention of disability. So it is not fully reflecting the human rights-based approach which the CRPD brought in much later. Nevertheless, both instruments have had significant impact on each other and continue to do so. So we'll be talking about some of the ways that they've learned from each other, and we can see this with respect to the evolution of the language, for example, that the CRC Committee is using now, but also in terms of its specific rights and principles. And just to give one example, where we can see that the CRC has evolved in its interpretation is on inclusive education. So it's really been consolidated over the years, thanks also to the positive influence of the CRPD standards. So of course, while the CRC did recognize the value and goal of inclusive education, previously it still reflected acceptance of the existence of a special education system, and that inclusion within general education will vary. But since the CRPD Committee has held its Day of General Discussion on Inclusive Education back in 2015, and the CRC Committee was invited to participate, and since the adoption of General Comment Number 4 of the CRPD Committee on Inclusive Education, the CRC Committee has consolidated its position, and it's grown into a decisive commitment to inclusive education to guarantee all children with disabilities the right to inclusive education in mainstream schools. So we can see that there's a clear process of mutual impact and mutual strengthening to the benefit of children with disabilities. So with this in mind, we can start our discussion to explore what are the intersections between the CRC and the CRPD and the committees when it comes to family life. So I'd like to start by asking Robert. We know that children and adults with disabilities face many barriers when it comes to respect for home and family. So if you could give us some examples of those barriers, or examples how children and adults with disabilities are excluded when it comes to home and family life.
Well, I think the family needs to be assisted right from the start, so they can have a positive way of supporting their child with a disability. Also, I think the professionals or doctors have a lot to do with this as well. They need to be more positive in the way they look at children and adults with disability, and not kind of say to the parents or to the mother, that you need to send your child to an institution and throw away the key and forget you had him and have another child type of thing. They need to get away from that kind of scenario. Also, accessible housing, and also the communities need to be accessible, and society needs to be also accessible as well. So we see people as people, children as children, and not, pity and all that kind of stuff. We need to get away from that and see people as real people and what they can bring to our society and to our community.
Thanks. So, Silvia, and what does the CRPD say particularly, and how has the committee interpreted respect for home and family for children and adults with disabilities?
Yeah. Thanks. Well, besides what Robert just mentioned, I think throughout this week we have been talking of many of the barriers that adults and children with disabilities face in the exercise of the right to have a family, and that is there's still a lot of stigma and disability-based discrimination, and the capacities that persons with disabilities have an understanding what that means, like getting married, for example, or being able to become parents. So we've seen we've heard testimonies this week about people who, because of their disabilities, have been denied that right to have children or to take care of their children. And also children, because of the disabilities that they have been separated from their parents because usually it is believed that that they should be in institutions because that's where the better services are provided for, or because of that same stigma, parents don't know how to raise those children because of their disabilities.
So what kind of recommendations has the committee been making then with respect to states about this right?
Yes, so basically, based on Article 23 of the CRPD, the committee has made strong recommendations that all those restrictions that states still have in legislation and policy that restrict people with disabilities to getting married or having children and keeping their children be abolished, but also that communities and services be provided for so that children with disabilities can stay within their family and be raised there. So basically, and something very important regarding Article 23 is that states should also adopt measures in order for children with disabilities and young adults with disabilities retain their fertility so that they have the choice to have children if they wish to. Because, of course, one of the very widespread human rights violations that have been identified by the committee is forced sterilization in persons with disabilities.
Thank you, Silvia. So I'm going to pass now to Velina, so we can hear about how the Convention on the Rights of the Child addresses respect for home and family for children, including children with disabilities.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you. I'm pleased to be here for the second time. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me. Am I not speaking? Okay. So the Convention on the Rights of the Child pays a lot of attention to the right to children, to family environment. First of all, I would like to let you know that this convention recognizes as children all persons below the age of 18. And the preamble of the convention starts with the recognition of the importance of the family as a natural environment for children to grow up and to be cared for by their parents. And already there we find a kind of recognition and invitation to state parties to this convention to support, to provide support to families, to parents to be able to care for their children. There are many articles, many provisions in the convention that recognize and provide protection for the child to grow up in the natural family, or unless it is not in the best interest of the child. For example, I would like to start with Article 9 that says that children should not be separated from his or her parents against their will, except when it is necessary really for the well-being of the child or to protect the best interests of the child. This article also says that any separation that could take place should be decided by judicial body, or if it is not under the national laws, should be applicable, should be applied, should be made appealed before courts. So this is a guarantee for the children that they should live with their families and not be separated. Then further on, the convention says if the child has been separated, the child and the parents has a right to maintain regular contacts between themselves. It's another important guarantee for the child that the child keeps the contacts and knows his or her parents. An important provision of the convention is Article 16 that says, again, it is state parties should ensure that the right to home or privacy or family should not be arbitrarily interfered by state or other actors. So this article protects the family life of the child against any arbitrary interference. For example, if state or state bodies or institutions want to interfere for example, to separate the child from his or her parents, this such kind of decision should be legally grounded, should be well motivated, should be also proportionate to the aim of the law. For example, this aim could be protection of the child. There is another very important provision of the convention, Article 18, that says explicitly that both parents have common responsibilities for the upbringing and development of the child. And another very important part of this article is that the best interest of the child should be a basic concern of both parents. It's a recognition of responsibilities of both parents, not only of the mother or of the father, but both parents. And the convention actually asks parents to exercise their responsibilities in the best interest of the child. Well, another important part of this article is that it puts a clear obligation to the state parties to provide any appropriate assistance to parents, to to be able to perform their child-rearing responsibilities. And this assistance should be of any kind, not only material assistance, but also provision of support and help in positive parenting, assistance in parenting skills, provision of devices or daycare facilities, any type of assistance that parents would need in order to care for the child and in order to prevent separation of the child from the family. Well, there is another important provision in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, providing it is addressed to the child, and it provides protection of the child against any type of abuse or violence while being under the care of his or her parents. It is a very important article, and the committee always pays a lot of attention to this protection rule. I would like to give one example. For example, our constant concern is the way parents educate or discipline their children, including children with disabilities. We are almost with each state coming to the committee, we express our concern about the use of corporal punishment or other types of violent discipline, and this is one of the major concerns of our committee. So this is what Article 19 says about the protection of children against harm, ill treatment, or neglect or abuse while in the care of their parents. So we should bear this in mind. So this is in general what the Convention says about respect and protect the right of the child to family environment, to live with his or her own family, unless it is not in the best interest of the child and it is established by a judicial body in appropriate procedure, etc.
Thanks, Velina, for that overview. So I think we can see some clear the way that the both committees actually intersect in terms of their views about the fact that children are the best possible environment for children is the family environment. There's a need to support families to care for children, including children with disabilities. We've seen in the recommendations of both committees a very serious concern about institutionalization of children, including children with disabilities, and the call for deinstitutionalization. Both conventions and committees, they recognize that children and parents should not be separated on the basis of disability, so either of the child or the parent. And that, as you say, they should not be separated, children should not be separated except with competent authorities subject to judicial review, and that the separation should be in the best interest of the child. So we know that the best interest of the child is one of the guiding principles of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that it should be applied in all decision-making regarding children. So Velina, would you be able to explain a little bit more about this principle of the best interest of the child and how that it applies in terms of respect for family life, and how to determine the best interest of the child?
Thank you. Well, it is a difficult and complex issue, but I will try. It's the best interest of the child is a key concept of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Actually, it comes from the previous documents, for example, Declaration on the Rights of the Child, but the Convention really makes it a key, a fundamental principle, not only principle. Actually, the best interest of the child concept has been interpreted in one of the general comments of the committee, number 14 of 2013, It's a relatively new general comment. And this comment says that we should understand the best interests of the child as a threefold concept. First of all, it is a right of every child. And as a right, it means that every child has a right, his or her best interest, to be assessed thoroughly assessed and determined, and each decision that affected this child to be based on this determination of his or her best interest. Then the second meaning of the best interest of the child is that it is a principle of interpretation. The committee says that all the articles, all the rights of the convention actually are in the best interest of the child, but if someone finds it difficult to understand or interpret any provision of the convention, the best interest principle should serve as a basis of interpretation. And the third meaning of this principle is that best interest of the child is a rule of procedure, because the convention says that any decision that affects, that impacts the child should be taken on the basis of his or her best interest. The convention requires state parties to elaborate the clear procedures, how this is a guarantee, this is a safeguard, that the best interest of the child should be properly assessed and determined. The procedure means that there should be clear steps, clear guidance to any state bodies, be it administration or judicial body, court, or any other, or private entity. There should be guidance and clear steps to be followed, and guarantees that any decision could be appealed before a court or other body. How the best interest of the child should be properly assessed. This is what the general comment advises, guides state parties to the convention how to do this. And it's, I will try to summarize very briefly what the committee says with regard to this. The committee says that the general comment says that the assessment of the best interests of the child is a complex process. It should be done, if possible, by a multidisciplinary team of trained experts. Robert just said that very often medical doctors after the birth of the child advise families to put the child with disability into the institution. So we would like to avoid this, to enter this practice, and to establish state parties to establish multidisciplinary teams of well-trained professionals to assess the best the interest of every child. Another guidance that comes from this comment is that best interest assessment should take place individually. It's a process that takes every individual child in the specific context of that child, assessing all the circumstances around this child. So we would like to have individual solution for every single child. For example, if we speak about respect for home and family environment of the child, this is one of the key elements to be assessed if we are to be if a decision should be taken by a state, by institutions or state or any bodies about the child. So assessing the family environment and the prospects of the child to live there, we say that first of all, in the best interest assessment, we should listen to the child, him or herself. So there should be a reasonable accommodation if the child has some impairments, to let the child express his or her views, and these views should be given due consideration. The convention says, Article 12, according to the age and maturity of the child. So another element of this assessment is I'm speaking about the family environment of the child, the ability of the family to take care, and the needs of the family to receive appropriate assistance from the state in order to keep the child, not to separate the child. And of course, another elements around the child should be properly assessed. For example, elements that are part of child's identity, age, sex, religion, culture. These type of elements should be also part of the assessment. But what I said is should be taken into consideration. This is a process of individual assessment of each child, having in mind the individual circumstances and the needs of the child in these circumstances. Specific attention should be paid if a child is in a situation of vulnerability. This multidisciplinary team should be very cautious about elements that actually place the child in vulnerability. Here I have in mind child with disabilities or child in a process of migration, children living in the street. So all these circumstances should be taken into consideration. My last point at this stage is that there could be a conflict of interest, for example, between the child and the interests of parents, the child and interests of siblings, wider family. But what the general comments advises the state parties really to give to try to balance all these interests around the child and to give priority to the interests of the child. So at this stage, I think
Thank you, Velina. I know that was not an easy task to explain a very complex principle. And it's important to understand because the principle of the best interest of the child has been incorporated also into the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities under Article 7 on children with disabilities. So I'm going to now turn to our CRPD committee members, our former members. Robert, how can we know what's best for children?
Well, we need to involve the children in the decision-making process and using things like supportive decision-making, like easy read and assistive technology, because we know that's the way the world is going, so why shouldn't children with disabilities and young adults be involved in that as well? And really make sure that children are safe. I mean, especially in foster care, but things like having police checks and also things like, you know, we monitor, but they must be independent, you know, of service providers, because service providers will want to, you know, want them to yeah. But for me, it's about being in their own families. You know, what's that saying? It takes a village to raise a child, and I kind of really believe in that. And also, listen to disabled adults that have been through it. You know, because there's lots of adults that have been through this kind of thing. And listen to the evidence that shows children being placed in institutions or services causes damage, and it does, you know, and it's not, it shouldn't be a life sentence for people with, and children with disabilities either.
So explain a little bit more, Robert, about what you mean about a life sentence. So if a child goes into services, why does that mean it's a life sentence?
Well, the thing is the services want to keep them, and they find it very hard to get out. Like I was in there for 15 years before I got out, and then before that was another 15 years in various institutions and foster homes and all that kind of thing. So, you know, 30 years in that kind of environment. No, it's really difficult. Children shouldn't be given tests like IQ tests that only show one aspect of them. You know, the thing is, you know, when I had mine years ago, it showed only one aspect of my life, not all of my life. And we need to be careful because I think they're really wrong. And they set up children to fail. They really do. And children should be treated appropriately for the age and not being treated like babies, where we often hear, oh, my son's got a brain of a 5-year-old. I mean, that to me is disgusting to say that about your own child, and yeah, I just don't like it.
Thanks, Robert. I think you raised some very important points about the need for participation, to look at evidence-based assessments, and to realize that a lot of the assessments, the tests, the approaches that are still in force today are very singular approaches, which are out of date, which don't take into account the full scope of a child's personality and life and wishes. So we need to be very much aware of all these kind of processes and procedures which are not embracing the human rights-based approach and the child rights-based approach. Silvia, if you could expand a little bit more on how the CRPD committee considers the best interest of children with disabilities.
Yes, as you mentioned before, the best interest of the child is mentioned explicitly under Article 7 of the CRPD, so this is one of the principles that should be used to interpret Article 7, as Velina has widely explained what this means exactly. But actually, there are mentions of how to include the opinions and the child with disabilities perspective within other articles of CRPD that maybe we haven't paid much attention to. So, for example, when reading Article 13 of Access to Justice, there is a explicit reference to providing procedural and age-appropriate accommodations when accessing justice. So, of course, this is very specific to access to justice, but this also means that based on one of the principles under Article 3 of CRPD, which is respect for evolution of children with disabilities, means that we should respect the age of the child and provide measures and appropriate supports according to the age of the child. So we often hear, like Robert just mentioned, oh, my son is 18 years old, but his mental age is 5. And so this individual gets treated like he's 5-year-old, but he's actually 18. And we should really respect the evolution of children. If children are 13, they should be treated like they're 13 and placed in school with children of that age and not of children of younger age. And this, in every setting, we're talking about education, but also other type of activities, recreational, cultural, etc. And so something that the CRPD committee has also developed is a general comment, number 7. It has been the last general comment that the CRPD committee has adopted just very recently, last year. And it does include also references on how to include the views and opinions of children with disabilities in the right to participate. So it is important also that, that states provide the necessary measure for children to be able to express their opinions. Specifically in Article 7, it says on matters that affect them. But I should go further than that, and as the CRPD committee has done, and say that children with disabilities should be able to participate in any kind of decision-making process. And so the state should have it has the obligation to provide the necessary supports for children to be able to express their views in any kind of decision-making process. And those support should be age appropriate and of course disability appropriate, disability specific. When we take a look at what Article 4.3 says regarding taking into account to consult persons with disabilities through their representative organizations, is that states should also consider those organizations that represent children with disabilities or the interests of children with disabilities, or even organizations of children with disabilities themselves when that is possible. So there are obligations that states should comply with, and that the CRPD committee has been very direct in mentioning. And this is, of course, these organizations, but also supporting organizations so that children are able to express their views in all those decision-making processes that are relevant to children, but also to persons with disabilities, providing supports in other spheres. We have mentioned education in this panel, but also political participation, expressing views in family matters, and other issues that we have mentioned here, like retaining fertility and being able to stay in the family.
Thank you, Silvia. Yeah, I think your highlighting of Article 4, Paragraph 3 is very important because it has that explicit reference on the need to actively involve and closely consult with children with disabilities as well. And this is on the design of law and policies and different strategies, and that would also include, of course, deinstitutionalization policies and strategies, children living in those institutions, adults who have lived in those institutions, as Robert was mentioning as well. So on this particular issue of institutions and institutionalization, Article 20 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child still states that, if necessary, placement into suitable institutions for the care of children is permitted. Velina, I wanted to ask, how does the Committee on the Rights of the Child interpret this?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, yes, this is what Article 20 says. The first point that I would like to mention as part of our interpretation is that this article is very important for its aim to really to guarantee the right of the child to care. If the family cannot, for various reasons, own family of the child, take care of the child, this is a very important obligation of the state party to the convention to provide alternative care for the child. The child has an absolute right to receive care because of the status of the child. It's a child, and care is needed for the child to grow up as an autonomous adult. Let us put it like that. So, this is what the first part of Article 20 says. A child temporarily or permanently deprived of his or her family environment, or in whose own best interest cannot be allowed to remain in that environment, shall be entitled to special protection and assistance provided by the state. So this article, this part of paragraph first of this article also requires interpretation of the kind of reasons for the child not to stay with his or her family environment. We already said something about that. I am not going to elaborate a lot, but we should bear in mind that there are cases when the child cannot stay with a family. Robert mentioned one of the reasons for the safety of the child, for example, not to be harmed or neglected or abused or etc. And also there are cases where families abandon children, so we should provide protection and care. The rest of the second paragraph states that the state party shall, in accordance with their national laws, ensure the care and protection. Your question is about the institutions. Institutions are considered by the convention as an option of alternative care, but it's the last option, last resort option. Before that, the committee encourages the state parties to consider family, other types of alternative care. For example, at the first place comes foster placement, foster care, which is a kind of substitute family for the child, a couple-line adoption, and then the institutions come. The committee, first of all, when the issue of alternative care is at a question or a dispute, we always invite and urge the state parties to reform their care system and to start deinstitutionalization. Or there are state parties which already have started to reform the care facilities. So there is a process of deinstitutionalization in many member states. I would say. I would like to say here. So another point of interpretation of this text is we encourage state parties to transform big inhuman institutions as a first stage of the institutionalization process to small facilities where children can find individual care, individual support, live in a more human environment. Robert mentioned about service providers. I understood him as service providers sometimes creating demand for children to be placed in institutions. It's a concern of our committee also. We always encourage this to stop, to keep this option as a really last resort measure if no other options are available, because we should understand that child should be provided by care. And also Robert mentioned about damage that institution cause to children. The committee strongly agrees with that. This is at the bottom. This is the reason that we strongly recommend deinstitutionalization. We recommend also any type of alternative care to be decision of placement of children in alternative care to be taken as a measure of last resort after, based on the best interest. And also we encourage state parties to develop and follow quality standards for alternative care. This is one of our major comments and recommendations. Standards for alternative care that include careful monitoring in order to avoid this life sentence, children to stay there for life. So we would like the care to be monitored and adjusted and to be adjusted to the age and developmental needs of the child. So we would like individual solution, regular and systematic monitoring of placement. And well, at this stage, this is general framework of our kind of concerns and recommendations when we speak about alternative care and institutions.
Thank you for expanding on that. So I think it's clear that the right of the child to care and the priority should be for them to stay within their family, for foster families and institutions as a clear last resort, and preferably into small facilities. So Silvia, according to the CRPD committee, is there any acceptable reason to allow institutionalization of children with disabilities, even in these small facilities or small group homes, for example?
The CRPD committee has clearly said no. Any kind of institution, even if it's small, is an institution, and it is, of course, definitely not the best place, not even the last resort place to place children with disabilities with no parental care. There should always be an effort to find other kind of environment, always a family or alternative family, or if there is no alternative family that is able to provide care for this child within the community, or foster care or adoption, as it has been mentioned here, but not even small group homes is an acceptable environment for children with disabilities. Families have always, it is, I will pick up something that Eric Rosenthal mentioned earlier this week, and there is even scientific evidence that children who do not grow up within a family setting have long-term psychological effects that are not able to be acquired later in life. So there is, of course, a need for states to strengthen efforts for children with disabilities to stay within their families, but if this is not possible, to find alternative solutions within family settings always, and never within institutions, no matter how small they are.
Thank you, Silvia. And I just wanted to read a quote from General Comment number 5 on Article 19, which says, large or small group homes are especially dangerous for children for whom there is no substitute for the need to grow up with a family. Family-like institutions are still institutions and are no substitute for care by a family. So, Robert, can it ever be right to institutionalize children?
You want me to answer this one? Because I'll have to say it's a big fat no. But
So you've got some of your ideas down here, Robert. So do you want to talk about the first one, and I can ask you some questions about it?
Yeah, institutions and services are places of abuse, and we know that it's been well documented that these places are full of abuse, and also subtle abuse as well. Some staff have done it very subtly. Like, I know one of the things where a lot of people with intellectual disabilities have learned to smoke in institutions. I know from my experience in New Zealand, and it was both used as a bribery and also a punishment as well. So it had a twofold effect.
So I know you've shared a little bit about your story this week, Robert, and there's lots of stories that you could tell. is there any story that you can think of that you would like to tell, just to give some examples of the kinds of abuse that you saw in the institutions, just in case people weren't here for your other talk today?
Yeah, like when I was quite young, I was only about 5 or 6, and I saw someone being hosed with a fire hydrant hose, and you know how powerful they are. Well, I mean, I was just really taken back, and the staff person said, "This is what you'll get if you misbehave," basically. But I've seen it in services too, where a staff person, you know, this other person didn't get on with the staff person, and okay, he burnt his stuff, but the aftermath was absolutely shocking, where this person actually gave this person a really good hiding, basically, you know, and we just couldn't believe it. And then on top of it, they rang up this guy, this person from the workshop, and he came, and he was quite high up in the workshop, and yeah, it was just horrific to see these kind of things happen to our friends.
And you were saying, Robert, about sometimes the abuse is really obvious, like a fire hose or being beaten up, but sometimes it can be really subtle. And that can be, you know, things like not having any choice and control, as well as neglect, hey?
Yeah.
Do you want to speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and they used to buy the clothes. It wasn't the clothes you wanted, it was the clothes that they wanted you to wear. And, you know, things like we had a staff person that took all our stuff, like I had records and stuff, and the staff person took them. We never got anything back. We never got the money back. So, I mean, yeah, it was just really bad.
Do you mind telling the story, Robert, about what happened when they found out that you had a cat that you'd found, that you'd adopted? Because it was against the rules, wasn't it?
Yep.
What happened to your cat?
Well, it got thrown out the window, basically. Literally. The person came into my room without knocking on the door, and I had the cat in my bed top. I think she took the bed clothes off, and the cat went out the window at about 100 miles an hour. And I performed a bit, I think. Yeah, but I mean, that's what people used to do to us. Yeah.
And what about your education, Robert? So when you were growing up in the institution, how did you go to school? Like, how did you learn?
Well, I went to the school in the institution, but it wasn't a very good school. It was actually crap, actually, as far as I was concerned. I mean, basically listening to this lady on the radio that was talking, I don't know what the hell she was talking about, but I'd certainly kick a ball around and listen to her. But yeah, basically I had no education until I was about 9, 10. That was when I got my education. So, and I didn't go to secondary school because my parents thought I was too thick, so I didn't go. So kind of what I've learnt is from out of school, not in school.
So your next one here that you've got down here, do you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, this is a really hard one about losing contact with family. I mean, most of the time I spent with my family was from 15 to 18. So basically the most important years I missed out. And how you're supposed to bring those things back when you missed out on them? You know, they're gone forever. Once you know, you go through those young years and you don't have those experiences, they've gone forever, and I think it was really hard for, well, Mum and I didn't get on anyway, and that was really sad because I think mums are supposed to be close to their children, but we weren't close at all. We're probably 50 yards apart, you know, but that's, I don't blame my parents for that. I blame the system. It was the system that did that to us, and yeah, and I don't think we should have a system like this anymore. And I think you lose your individuality of being in an institution. I think you don't often have a sense of humour. Well, if it is, it was lost. And I think one of the things that my mum told me is that when I was first put in the institution, I kind of had a Bonnie accent, like I talked real Scotch, because for my dad, we listened to him. And then I went to the institution and I lost it. I mean, that's, yeah, so that's my culture gone, you know, and I think cultures are very important, but I lost that.
And talking about losing your individuality, you talked a little bit the other day about, you know, how you all had the same haircuts on the same day and you didn't have your own clothes.
Yeah.
You also didn't have any possessions, did you?
No. If you read my book, you find that out very quickly.
Do you want to tell some stories?
Well, I mean, we had a library in Whanganui, and of course I had lots of books from the library that I took out and kind of didn't give them back. But I gave them back in the end, and they wanted to fine me, but the other persons in the book said, well, he's looked after them, he's treated them like gold, so why should you? So, yeah, and the things like sports books, animal books, film books. So, I mean, I'm interested in lots of things, dinosaurs, yeah.
But the reason you took those books was because you had none, hey?
No.
And is it true that you taught yourself to read with those stolen library books?
Yes, it was, yep.
So you've got another couple of points here. How are we going for time? Yeah, ish? Okay, cool. We'll run through these ones, okay?
Yep. Yeah, segregation doesn't work. It will never work. It never has worked, so why do we still do it? And like I said before, it's like a life sentence. And I think this lady said, Velina said they say the last resort, but once you're in, you never get out. You know, some of my friends have been there for, 30, 40, 50 years. And how are you supposed to create a life when you come out? It's the only thing we know. We don't know anything else. So, and they expect us to walk into the community and just get on with it. I'm sorry, but it's not that easy. It's not easy at all. Institutions can be big and small. Small ones are not better either. Countries that are building small group homes, but it really is re-institutionalisation. That's what it is. So, we got to get rid of them. The institutions are from the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries, and that's where they should stay. They're, bygone things, and they should just go. And if I had my way, I would get a bulldozer and bulldoze the whole lot down.
Thanks a lot, Robert. I couldn't agree more. You were talking about there's increasing evidence, of course, of the harm of institutions and small group homes. The fact that there's a loss of individuality, loss of identity of children, and including children with disabilities who are placed here, and beyond the risk of the increased risk of violence and abuse. And of course, there should be quality assurance and monitoring. But beyond that, there's been many studies which document that the lost opportunities of children to develop essential skills they need for life, coping mechanisms which they cannot get in even small group homes, the need for personal attachment with an adult who is committed and invested in that child and knows them, knows the boundaries, knows how to adjust roles as they grow up and as they mature. This doesn't happen in institutions or small group homes because things are fixed. There's fixed rules, there's fixed procedures, no cats. And the staff, of course, they're working in shifts, there's staff turnover, so there is no way to have this kind of deep relationship with an adult, and that can't be replaced by peers either. So it's clearly evident, and the evidence is, there's more and more reports and studies coming out about this, which we can't ignore. And the fact that the small group home model is becoming a norm in many countries. It's not on a temporary basis. So this is something we need to be very vigilant about, to advocate against and really ensure that children can grow up with families and that states can provide and invest in these kind of solutions. So just to close our discussion here and open up for questions, I wanted to ask Velina what kind of plans are foreseen for joint work between the CRC Committee and the CRPD Committee to discuss these matters, and if there ever is, would it be possible to work together on revising the General Comment number 9 on children with disabilities to bring a more human rights-based approach, to update that in light of the CRPD?
Thank you, Victoria. Yes, I would like to let you know that having in mind these slightly different approaches of the two committees coming from the two conventions, the two committees, CRPD and CRC committees, established last year a joint working group. Robert and myself are members of that working group, and we will meet in September. In the meantime, our former colleague, Jorge Cardona, was assigned to prepare a document which is in a drafting stage, a document that elaborates on the approaches of the two committees on some subject matters, and alternative care is one of these issues that we are going to discuss. We have this document. We commented on the first draft by the end of June. Our colleague and his team are in a process of revising the first draft according to the comments received. Both committees sent, and also other stakeholders also sent comments to the draft. And that there will be a discussion, of course, in September and further. I am not sure what the final outcome of this process will be. You mentioned that one of the possible outcomes is a revision of the general comment on the CRC committee. It depends on many factors. For the major threat to choose for revision of the general comment is the time. And you know that the treaty body system, UN treaty body system, is in a period of strengthening. We are in a process of changing our working methods in order to meet kind of to meet kind of requirements from state parties, and also to elaborate our working methods. So it's a difficult time for the system. It's difficult for the committee because we are dependent on the secretarial support and time. We are not allowed to work on several general comments, only one. We just finished our revision of the general comment number 10 on child justice. It will be published very soon, the new general comment 24, replacing the general comment on juvenile justice. It has a new title now, rights of child in the justice system. And we started on a new general comment, working on a new general comment on the children's rights in digital environment. So it depends, to come back to your question, it depends on the discussion of this joint, within this joint working group. So we will see. But the committee, our committee, the CRC committee, views the process of kind of banning institution, this issue as a process, similar to the process of reaching full inclusive education. We are in a position cannot ban institutions because they are in the convention, which is a legal document. It's our mandate is to follow this convention, and we see the institutions really as a last resort measure. Sometimes small, to go to small group care, we see it as a interim, in some cases interim measure. Sometimes as a also last resort measure if there is no available family care. And also we should bear in mind that some children, for example adolescent children, including children with disabilities, would prefer not to be in a family but to live in a group with their siblings. So these are the three kind of grounds for us to consider small group care as suitable. What Martin said about his life in institution, we are fully aware of that. I'm coming from Bulgaria. The same example, same experience children in institutions have in Bulgaria. We started our deinstitutionalization process. We had 3,000 and more children with disabilities in institutions. We started with these children and we found, I hope, better solutions for them. So this is our process, and our committee encourages state parties really to invest a lot in family types of alternative care, invest in their child protection systems, child welfare systems, and this is for the moment what I can say before the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Velina. And I think you forgot to mention that next year the CRC Committee will hold a day of general discussion.
Oh,
yes, on children in alternative care. Actually, this is a topic also very relevant this year. The General Assembly will be adopting a resolution on children without parental care. So this subject is being widely discussed and will continue to be discussed. And just before opening up, I just wanted to, Velina, you were saying that the text of the convention has these provisions about, as a last resort measure, institutions. We should also remember Article 41 of this Convention on the Rights of the Child, which opens up the possibilities of looking to laws and international law, which is more conducive, so more progressive in the realization of rights of the child. So the committee, when the convention was conceived and drafted, this possibility was left open that if there is more advanced standards, those should be applied. So with this, I would be happy to open up the floor. I'm sure many of you have questions or comments for our panelists. There's a mic that will be passed around.